Hi, I'm Dan Fishman. I'm the winemaker here at Donham Estate. And I want to tell you a little bit about your 2023 winter allocation wines today. We're featuring the wines from the 2020 vintage, which, as a lot of people know, was a challenging vintage across a lot of Northern California. Started out with some frost in the winter or in the early spring. And so that reduced our yields a little bit right from the beginning. And then after a pretty mild summer, we then had a big heat spike in August that led to some massive wildfires. And so because of that smoke pressure, we didn't want to have that affect the wine. So we started harvesting right away. We were able to bring everything in about a week. So we avoided any smoke problems. But because it was pretty early in the season, we wound up with a lot of wines that are a little bit lighter in style, a little bit kind of more red fruit driven, and some really, I think, interesting wines. So some wines that are a little bit different for Donham, but wines that we're really proud of and that I think show really well even with the tough vintage. This allocation features, I think, one of the most interesting wines of the 2020 vintage, which is the Russian River Estate Pinot. So this is blended from multiple different blocks. It has the Calera clone, the Pommard, and the 667, as well as a little bit of Donham clone. And because of the smoke and the heat that we had, we harvested this the earliest we ever had. So it's really a little bit lighter in style, a little lower alcohol. It's interesting though, I think it has a really consistent flavor profile with previous vintage. You still get a lot of the dark fruit, a little bit of cherry, but what you find is a little bit of a more elegant palate, a little bit kind of the finish. You don't get as much of the alcohol there because it's just a little bit less ripe. So I think a really interesting Russian River Pinot. I think this is one that will definitely age really well, and I think really shows how in a tricky vintage you can still make a really great wine. Just have to be a little bit flexible in your decision making. Next up is the 2023 Hills, which is from the estate vineyard here in Carneros. Our estate kind of features three prominent hills that you'll notice as you're driving by, and this is blended from vineyard blocks on each of them. It's a little bit different than our Carneros Estate Pinot, which features some of the riper blocks. The Three Hills features some of the earlier ripening, some of the clones that show off a little bit of a lighter fruit profile, a little more red fruit. I find it to be a really nice wine. It's great for early drinking, ages well as well, but just because of that lighter profile, it's one that you can drink a little bit younger. In 2020, I definitely pick up a lot of the red fruit, and then maybe just tiny little hints of dark fruit as well on the finish. Overall, really balanced wine, and one I think that shows off a little bit different side of Carneros. Next up is the 2020 Carneros Pinot Noir, which is kind of the sister wine to the Three Hills. So this is our flagship wine blended from all the different blocks on the estate. It's the only wine we've made every year since 2001. And it's really, I think, our representation of what we think of Carneros, and also what the Donham style means. So a lot of concentration, a lot of big, rich fruit, but also really elegant, really balanced. It's got a mix of red and black fruit. And I also find there's something to the terroir at Donham that I think is a signature, which is a little note of sassafras or root beer that I always pick up every vintage. 2020, I think, did really well in Carneros. We were ready to harvest here, so even though it was an early pick date, everything was ripe and ready to go. So I think this wine will be aging beautifully for years to come. Next up is the 2020 Anderson Valley Pinot Noir, which comes from the Angel Camp Vineyard at the far northern end of the Anderson Valley. This area was actually far enough away from the fires that it wasn't affected by smoke, so it's the one wine that we harvested later in the year into mid-September. So for that reason, it's one of the richest wines of the vintage, tons of concentration, flavor profile's a little bit darker. And because of the iron-rich volcanic soil up in Anderson Valley, it's also got really nice tannic structure. It gives it body, length, and really makes this an ageable wine. This is one that I would recommend setting aside for a little bit of time, maybe give it another 6 months, and then it should be showing beautifully. Thanks for joining me to taste through the winter allocation wines. I think with this featuring of the 2020 vintage, it shows that even in a difficult vintage, we can still do a lot of interesting things, make some really special wines. And I think it's also important to note how low the production is on all these wines. So this will be our smallest production year, hopefully ever, certainly less than we've made recently. So there's not a lot of the wine, but there's some really great wines, and thanks for taking the time to taste them with me.